Welcome to the Atheist Podcast. I'm Erin.
And I'm Kelley. Atheist is where we will explore American cultural trends through the lenses of a devout theist
and a devout atheist. We will discuss the messiness of being human,
the latest in social science, psychology, and American culture,
and what any of it has to do with Homo sapiens' longtime preoccupation with religion. We are so excited to have today on the show. Linda Pieczynski is a former attorney and former deputy chief of the criminal division for the DuPage County State Attorney's Office in Chicago. In addition to her work as a lawyer, Linda served on multiple boards, including as the president of Call to Action, which advocated for women's rights in the Catholic Church, and as a board member for Dignity USA, which advocated for LGBT rights in the church. During her time as president of Call to Action, the story of the sex abuse scandal in the Catholic Church was broken wide open due to the reporting of the Boston Globe, and Linda became an expert spokesperson who traveled the country and appeared on all of the major news networks advocating for reform to the church. She also happens to be my dad's sister, so my aunt. Welcome, Linda. We are so delighted to have you.
Glad to be here.
So I thought maybe we could start, I know a little bit about the story of how you got involved with Call to Action and Dignity USA, but I thought maybe we could start even earlier than that if maybe you could tell us a little bit about just growing up and your relationship to the church, growing up, and then, eventually we can kind of get to how you found yourself associated with those organizations, but we really want to know about your background.
Sure. I grew up in St. Louis, St. John the Baptist Parish, and I went to grammar school at St. John the Baptist. My entire elementary years, I was the regular cradle Catholic, church on Sunday, and it was always a big deal. We always had to go. I didn't really think too much of it at the time in terms of what was going on in the world. Women could either be teachers or nurses, and that was what I didn't think to question it during grade school. I had a wonderful sister at the school in my 7th and 8th grade year, Sister Renee, who just actually died earlier this year after I got to see her one last time, who basically told my parents, send your daughter to Hannity Colmes, which is a archdiocesan, or was an archdiocesan college preparatory for girls. And it went independent this school year, because the archdiocese wasn't going to support it anymore. And I had probably the most forward-thinking sisters as teachers that really, really debated important issues. It was the civil rights era. Women's rights were starting to peak up, but there was never any question that they expected every single one of us to go to college, which was the case with that particular school, and still is. And they're the ones that suggested I go to DePaul University up in Chicago, because I think the guidance counselor knew that I could get a scholarship there. And, I continued to do all the things that I was expected to do, going to church. In fact, I would say that I was fairly devout, not to an excessive degree, but all the novenas and all that sort of stuff you were supposed to make sure you didn't end up in hell or in purgatory. I did that kind of stuff, but I always questioned things. I can remember in high school, in my religion class, we had some priest, and it was always a priest who would come teach you about birth control and sex and everything. And I remember debating with the priest, and I said, no, wait a minute. And this was when the pill had come out, and my mother was taking it, but then she felt guilty and stopped. But I said, no, wait a minute. So if you practice rhythm with the intent that you not get pregnant, but it's not reliable, that's not a sin. But if you take a pill that guarantees that you won't get pregnant, or to a certain extent, then that's a sin. But the intent's the same. So why is one okay and one not? I mean, it's like you're playing Russian roulette with the rhythm stuff. And, and he hemmed and hawed, and I think he left the priesthood eventually. But, I didn't, but that's the way we were taught, is to question things and not be satisfied with an easy answer. So it was, I just remember doing that. And then I ended up at DePaul, and I went to church. That's how I met the priest that ended up doing our wedding, Father Mike, who was a Vincentian, who was very progressive. And I would go every Sunday, just like I was supposed to. But the whole church teaching, especially on sexuality, just didn't hit me real hard. I had a professor, Chuck Suchar, who I had for deviant behavior psychology, because I was at one point a psychology major. And he brought in as speakers 2 lesbians who were a couple, explaining their relationship. And they were young women who didn't look any different than anybody else, very attractive. And I thought, oh, okay, well, they liked each other and they seemed pretty nice. So, okay. I hadn't really thought about the whole LGBT stuff at that time. Though I do remember watching the movie Some Like It Hot when I was a kid. And at the end, when Joey Brown discovers that, what's his face? From Days of Wine and Roses, the actor.
Jack Lemmon.
Jack Lemmon. When he discovers that Jack Lemmon is really a man, he and Joey Brown's answer is like, well, not everyone's perfect. And I thought, oh, so why couldn't they? They like each other, so why couldn't they? I mean, I had these crazy, these ideas from those days, which was kind of crazy, but are not now. And so then I, met my husband. Oh, and I had a teacher, one of my religions class, Rabbi Marks was his name. He was fairly famous up here. His daughter was actually part of the Symbionese Liberation Group that died in that fiery shootout back in the tumultuous 60s. He was just marvelous. I mean, and that's when my whole it really helped shape my broadening of what religion is, because I also took a world religion class and was like, well, the Quran and the Bhagavad Gita and the Bible are all kind of saying the same thing, treat others nice and we all get along. So what's the big deal with why have all these divisions when really it's just different ways to what we call God? And of course, my view of what God is has drastically shifted, especially since I got involved with Call to Action. In terms of, I don't believe, when you're a kid, you see this God on a cloud, kind of a mean guy that's judging everybody. And it's so much broader now, especially after reading people like Teilhard de Chardin and Thomas Berry, that are all about the common consciousness based on the physical world. And that's kind of how I see it. And then I met my husband, and he is as agnostic as you can get. He would he would pretend to go to church on Sunday when he was living with his grandma up here when he was in college. And then he'd stop by and get a bulletin to show her that he went. But once we got married, that was done. But I got heavily into the women's movement. I was in law school then, and was very keenly aware of the church's stance on women, which really was disturbing. And that was about the time when I started not going to church as much. I really struggled with that issue, and it really hit the fan when I joined Call to Action and met
Yeah.
some of the best theological minds in the world.
Mm.
Elizabeth Schussler Fiorenza, Rosemary Ruther. I knew all of them.
Oh my
Which was great.
gosh.
I met Hans Kung. In fact, I told him how to pronounce a word that's not acceptable in English, but apparently in German it is. And and I'm like, you mean, oh, that was delightful. So I met all these huge minds and
Yeah.
stuff. And then when and I was still going to church occasionally. I found some churches I liked, and I would change churches if the pastor changed. And then the child abuse uh, scandal hit, and I was the media spokesperson for Call to Action. So my phone was ringing off the hook all the time. I was doing radio interviews and TV interviews, and sometimes they'd send a limo to take me down to what was the equivalent of the Fox station. In fact, I did Sean Hannity before Sean Hannity was Sean Hannity. He had a partner in it, and that was interesting. But they paid for the limo, so. But I did a lot of work on that. I even protested down in Dallas when they had the big bishops conference, and I got thrown out of the hotel, which was okay. You learn the rules of where you can stand and stuff like that. But it was eye opening. And then Cardinal George up here had a case with a priest that was abusing kids on the West Side, which was a poor Black neighborhood. And it came out that he knew about it. He let the guy stay there, even though the panel that was convened by the diocese said he should remove him. And he went on to molest other kids. And then you came out, and I said, that's it. I'm done. I cannot be part of an institutional church that is doing this to children and is also harming people I love. They've gone so far the other direction that I couldn't stand it. And I ended up joining a house church, which there's 11 of us. It was started 20 years ago by some people that worked in hospice together at Loyola Hospital. And we meet, well, we used to meet once a month in person, and then the pandemic hit. We met every week on Zoom. And now we still meet on Zoom, but at Christmas and summertime, we have a gathering. So we got a big party tomorrow. And everybody does their own thing. I mean, if it's your week, you do the liturgy. It doesn't follow what the Catholic Church says. Everybody's very progressive. I would have to say that I've come to see God as whatever that life force is in the universe. I'm not sure what it is. It doesn't really matter to me anymore, but I've experienced it. I've had some real woo-woo things happen. And I tell you, I go into a church these days and it's like, ugh, because the priest at my parish, when Sarah, my oldest daughter, was in 4th grade, molested about 11 boys behind the altar. And he got away with it. That was in 1984, because I had just left the state's attorney's office. I offered my services to the bishop, the local parish. I trained the parishioners, the students, the teachers, because I had been teaching classes for teachers on child abuse before that, and prosecuting offenders in the state's attorney's office and representing defendants as well. And it was all rejected because first time it ever happened, baloney. And then when the child abuse, fast forward to what, 2001, when the child abuse thing exploded, I went into the state's attorney's office. I said, you can get this guy because they moved him out of state after he got removed from the parish, which means the statute of limitations didn't run. And he's now doing penitentiary time in Missouri because we prosecuted him up here. He did his time. He was a sexually violent offender, put away for another 3 years. Then he was allowed out. And then Missouri indicted him because he went around all over Minnesota, California, doing his thing. And it's just, so that's kind of my story in not so short
Yeah.
Wow. I have so many questions.
Yeah. Where do you want
Go
to
ahead.
start? Go.
Go ahead.
Well, I guess my first question, just, in terms of like the child abuse scandal, which I wasn't even kind of thinking about. I had no idea that, I mean, obviously that touched everybody in the Catholic Church.
Yeah, I was very involved and still to a certain extent with SNAP, the Survivors Network. Barbara Blaine was a friend. She died way too soon. But so I've been involved with them. So I got to see behind the scenes when the attorneys met that were representing these people, what they were up against and what they knew. And based on that alone, I just can't. Catholic Church, no.
You just couldn't do it. I'm curious in terms of the work you were doing around call to action and the women's movement and trying to put forth women in more powerful positions in the church. What do you think do you think there was a connection between the lack of women in power or the idea of just how strong that patriarchy was with the child abuse scandal?
Well, it certainly plays a big role. Women, anytime you see women getting into power, you see a change in the institution. For example, when I started off as a young assistant state's attorney, a prosecutor, the rape laws were not that great for women. But as we saw more women get elected to the Illinois legislature, we had a big shift, completely redid the sexual assault laws, as well as child protective laws. And you see that in institutions when women get in, that they pay attention to those kind of things. It's not that the men don't care, it's just not on their radar screen, unless you're very unusual. And so you see this shift to power. And you can see it in the Scandinavian countries, for example, where they have to have a certain percentage of women in power, and the kind of social policies they have in terms of leave, for work when you're pregnant, and everybody's got a pram over there because you get one when the baby's born. All these things that are given to make family life easier when you have children. So that certainly is a big component of it. The other problem is that when you have an all-male patriarchy, which is hierarchical, there's nobody that holds them to account, and they all have their secrets. So I've learned this because of the priests that I've worked at Call to Action. We used to have all kinds of programming on this stuff and brought in people. Oh, I wish I could remember his name. He just died. Anyway, you have the gay priests who have secret lives. You have the priest with girlfriends who have secret lives. And then you have the molesters with secret lives, except everybody kind of knows what's going on, but I don't want my secrets exposed. And so let's send him to treatment. Let's move him to a different parish. And if you live in a bubble, and I have seen this in the gay community, whether it's male or female, if you don't interact with the opposite sex. In other words, you don't get into relationships where you have to compromise to keep your relationship going. That sometimes I've seen this happen in some dignity groups, because dignity has local groups all over the country, and they get together usually for liturgy and special events and stuff. And some groups haven't survived the women coming in because nobody has the skill set of interacting with the opposite sex and coming to consensus and
Huh.
and just cooperation that kind of comes in when when you can't identify with the other person as well as you could with somebody your own sex. And
Yeah.
so this is kind of like, and so you would see these divisions, and since there were mainly men in the group, sometimes the women were not real happy. The most successful groups are where they get together,
There's
get to know
both.
each other, can reach consensus, can because a lot of a lot of my friends, I mean, when you see them at their get-togethers, they're posting pictures and stuff. It's all, all guys, all women, and you don't have, I guess, as much. Some of these groups, uh, they just don't think about the fact that the issues for lesbians are different than men, because women
Yeah.
face a double whammy of misogyny and homophobia. I did a workshop once with a friend of mine who was a guy, and we answered all the questions, we resolved it, but you get those kind of things that pop up.
Yeah. Which is so interesting because so I had COVID last week, so I didn't get to go, but I was part of a planning group of me and 3 other women. We did a divine feminine retreat, an
Mhm.
Advent retreat for women.
Oh,
And one of the ideas is that that this divine feminine power, like there is this divine feminine energy,
right.
right? Which has been so, which has been silenced, and we don't look at God in terms of the feminine.
Right. That was a big part
And
of my development.
that in doing so we lose half of it, right? And it's not
Have-
that male energy is bad, it's just that it's
Right.
not balanced.
And if you reverse it, one of the things I used to go to was called Jesus Day. It was run by the Archdiocese by a very progressive priest, and they had wonderful speakers. And one of the speakers said, well, imagine that you grew up in a church where all the symbols are female, and you
Mhm.
only use she, and the statues are all women. As a man, how does that make you feel? And that was kind of one of the things that these lectures would do to kind of,
Mhm.
that would be really confining.
Yeah.
Have you read She Who Is by Rosemary Rathford Ruther? That's the one that did it for me.
Yeah, I've read sections of it, and I've used her definitely in research. I was telling
She's wonderful.
Aaron.
She just died a couple of years ago.
Yeah,
Yeah, she was
yeah,
marvelous, just
yeah,
marvelous.
amazing.
And what was the other one?
Fiorenza.
Elizabeth Schussler Fiorenza. She had a really important book. I can't remember the name right now.
Yeah,
But all of those women. Elizabeth Johnson.
uh-huh.
You know that they're all about the feminist theologians,
Yeah,
basically.
yeah.
And the womanists and stuff.
Well, and so I was kind of given the task of doing the lecture on the teaching on Jesus as feminine.
Mhm.
And, one of the things that I don't think I really even knew this before I started digging into it is, you might be able to talk about this better than I can, because I don't know, because I was not raised Catholic. So we didn't have we didn't have as many books of the Bible as you guys did, because you kind
Right.
of, you
Right.
had, Sirach and the wisdom scriptures.
Yeah, wisdom is good for
Yeah.
talking feminist theology.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So wisdom is like wisdom Sophia. Sophia is the word for wisdom in Greek. Is that correct? Right. And
Yes.
and And so in Hebrew scriptures, there's all of this kind of feminine language around wisdom being kind of the feminine attributes of God. And then in the New Testament, Jesus repeats all of these Hebrew scriptures saying, basically saying, I am wisdom. I am wisdom.
Well, in my studies, I've come to see the Holy Spirit as wisdom, as a form of wisdom. And remember, they're all supposed to be one, Trinity stuff. I'm not, I'm not into, but I basically see the feminine as the spirit, because my understanding is that's a feminine present, that I think the word ruah, I'm trying to remember back on all the
spirit.
books I read 20 years ago.
The parts where I think it's mostly in Luke, it's not in all of the scripture, but when Jesus does kind of refer back to some of those wisdom scriptures, and he does kind of claim it, and in that basically that he is kind of the perfect amalgam of the feminine and masculine, and that he kind of subverts all those patriarchal messagings of the time. And
we had a lot of speakers on reinterpreting the way people look at Jesus. And what drives me absolutely bonkers in the present climate is that, why do you keep quoting the Old Testament? The New Testament, if you're really Christian, was supposed to basically kind of clean things up, and you keep quoting all this old stuff, that doesn't. I mean, when you look at all the things Jesus didn't talk about, abortion, gay people, when you got to sexual sins, he was kind of like, hey, don't throw stones, because you're all sinners. I mean, that was about as much as he said. I wish I could, if I didn't realize you're going to ask me about books and stuff, because I would have researched all these wonderful books that I had that I gave away on reimagining Jesus and stuff like that, from various sources.
We can do a follow-up.
We can do another episode at a different time about that. Yeah.
All the stuff that made me a radical.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I'm curious if we kind of go back, back in your timeline a little bit, that how did you come to be involved in Call to Action? So I guess you were saying that it was when you were in law school, but
no, it was,
was there a story?
It was much later.
It was later.
It was much later. Yeah. I was, let's see, it was the year I hurt my knee. That was when I was 40. And I remember it because I had a neighbor of mine. You may have met her, Gail. She's been in a lot of stuff. She was at the party. Her and her husband had gone through this thing at St. John of the Cross, where I was going to church at that time, called Christ Renews His Parish. And it was a retreat weekend given by women to women, lay women to lay women, where you really kind of broke down all the layers, going down to the real essence of what you believed, what was important. It was extremely powerful. I met one of my best friends there, Debbie, who's a nurse, that we just had dinner the other night. And it was just, I had left the state's attorney's office because my boss lost the election, and I had gone into private practice. And then I got pregnant, had Jessica. She was about 4 when I went through the weekend, and I was just kind of restless. I was never a joiner, but the whole church thing, I was still kind of going because the kids were in school, but I was really angry about the women's issue. And I sometimes my spiritual director, I go see this sister, St. Joseph, usually every month. And I've done it for 20 years. She's just the wisest person I know. And she said, a lot of times when you feel like you're struggling, it's like pregnancy, that you can't push it. It just has to come on its own. and then suddenly there'll be this revelation or something. And I don't mean woo-woo, I just mean that things will be made clearer. And so I was in one of those spaces. I hadn't met her yet though. And I went to the weekend at my neighbor's recommendation because they had really gotten a lot out of it. And I got a lot out of it. It was just wonderful, but it made it, I started to read more some of the feminist theologian stuff. I'd pick up books, and I mean, I practically should have had a degree in theology by the time I was done. And my neighbor said, oh, they're doing this play at the parish about women in church history, important women in church history. It was a one-woman play. And it was wonderful. Oh my God, they did like Augustine's mother and all these, the women, a wife of a priest who, when they brought in celibacy, they kicked the women out. And I mean, just terrible history. But it was put on by Call to Action. They had a arts ministry as part of their ministry that they were doing. And I thought, wow, this is great. And they were promoting a conference they had every November. And I decided I'm going to go to the conference. It's just up by O'Hare Airport here. And that just changed my life. I mean, I was so moved by so many of the speakers. It was just incredible. And I went up to Sheila Daly, who was one of the co-founders, and said, I'd like to get involved and I'd like to volunteer. So I went to a meeting at this ratty old convent building that they were renting from the archdiocese at the time before they got kicked out. And I ended up joining the board. And because I was, I guess, articulate, and they wanted to attract younger people, I became president. And I was president for a number of years. And that's when I met all these great people and helped put on the conferences. And, just my consciousness I mean, people like Brian Swim, who's really big on, what do you call it? Cosmic cosmology, in terms of the, using the heavens and ecology as a way to get nearer to God and just the power in the universe and everything. He's written prolifically about it, and just wonderful, great people. And then that's where I met Mary Ann Duddy, who is the current executive director of Dignity USA, who just met the Pope, by the way. She had a meeting with the Pope on LGBT issues at the synod that took place a month and a half ago.
Yeah.
And he told her at the end of it, they gave him presents and stuff, all this pride stuff. And he said, keep on doing what you're doing, which was pretty good considering the United States has gone way backward. I'd never send my kids to Catholic school now. But I met her, and she was delightful. And I got invited as president of Call to Action. I just become president. They wanted me to go out to California, to LA, for their summer convention and speak. And I went out there, and I had not really, I met gay people through Call to Action that would come to the conference, and they were fun, and they'd always put on a little like reception one of the first nights of the conference, and I would attend because I was president, and you get to know everybody. I don't remember if Mary Ann was married yet. She had a religious ceremony in a Dignity chapter long before civil unions were a thing, and she's from Massachusetts. And but I remember her when she got married. She was showing me the picture. She had just like a regular reception, just like anybody else. And I just thought, well, this is really cool, because I had met Becky, and I thought, oh, she's really nice, and everything. But I go out to this big dinner dance. And before that, the night before, the night I got there, they said, oh, why don't you come to this baby shower? I'm like, okay. and a lesbian couple where one of them was pregnant and was going to have a baby. And I'm standing there thinking, my mom and dad are never going to believe this. I'm here at a lesbian baby shower. How did this happen to me? How did I get led to this place? Because it was so out of my regular day-to-day, existence.
Yeah.
But it was like, oh, this is fun, and she's opening up presents like anything else. And it felt so normal, and then we went to the dinner dance, and all the guys from Chicago who were at my party, except one got sick and couldn't come, our anniversary party. They all made sure I always had somebody to dance with, and so it was like, gosh, that was just a lot of fun. And I was giving a speech. I think it was my last year as president at the conference, because I would always address the people. We had like 2,000 people in Detroit. One time we had 5,000. We all sang happy birthday to Jenna, my daughter, because it was a weekend. It was the day of her birthday. And I would, it was when they silenced Sister Janine Gramick, who has since met with the Pope with approval, but she was silenced by Ratzinger. And I gave this like hell and damnation speech against.
Why was she silenced?
Because she, her ministry was ministering to gay people, along with this other priest. They had this organization, which I can remember the name of it. Well, she was associated, I believe, with New Ways Ministry, which still exists. And they would do retreats for parents and stuff of gay kids. And this was when Ratzinger was really dropping a hammer. He of the red patent leather shoes. He's one of those guys that just really didn't know what he was, And I gave this speech. There's a reading in scripture where Jesus is really angry and is saying, woe to the Pharisees and all this kind of stuff. And I use that as the cardinals and the bishops who were oppressing gay people. And this one woman came up to me in tears, and she said, thank you for what you said. She said, because she said, I've never heard anybody say anything like that I'm okay. And I'm like, oh my God, this is, wow. This is before you came out, Erin.
Yeah.
Mm.
And so, and I would have a lot of those reactions that people would say a lot of stuff afterwards, that it was like I was safe. I was a safe space, a safe person for people to come talk to. It would happen in court, because I would have these women police officers who, I knew were. Yeah. So I would talk about, I'm going to a board meeting this weekend in Nebraska with because of this gay and lesbian board I'm on. I'm the token token straight person, but it's really a lot of fun. And then you get people that would say stuff to you in private. I had a guy that I really liked, and his wife left him because she was gay, and her mother had, put the kibosh on something when she was a college student, and now she's married and she's got these 2 kids. And he was like, my God. And so I sat him down. I said, look, this is why people need to be out, because otherwise other people are getting hurt that shouldn't be. But so you just start, once you get started, your mind just keeps. And I remember the one time when I was in California, and I was on a panel, and I did this panel, and it was like I was possessed in a good way, that I was talking about how important it was to be out there, not saying out people, but to say, once people get to know you, and I use my own personal experience with my hairdresser. My hairdresser is a gay man, and he had some issues that I helped him with, and that opened my eyes a lot to what being gay in America was like. And so I was relating this stuff, and I had chills up my the back of my neck while I was speaking, because it was like I wasn't even thinking about I was speaking. It was just coming out. And afterwards, I had a guy come up to me a couple of years ago and says, I want to buy you a drink. I was at that conference in California and I just love what you said. It's like, I don't even remember what I said, but okay, you can buy me a drink. You know. So it was, I don't know. It's why I guess I believe in a higher purpose, a higher power, because how I got kind of led to all this stuff that was, it put me in a position to really do something that affected people's lives. So when I left, and I got to be very good friends with Marianne Juddy, and when I left the Call to Action Board, because I had served my terms and stuff, she approached me. She's just so slick, about joining the board. And it was like, okay, I will. And at that time, it was heavily male, but we had a male leader. He was at my party. He drove in from Ohio. And he really, really wanted to learn. And he listened, even though it was very patriarchal, the board at that time. And during his tenure, it totally mellowed, and more women, more consciousness of gender issues, women priests presiding at dignity events became more acceptable, because by this time a lot of the bishops were saying, hey, you say mass for this group and you're going to be disciplined, because they'd been thrown off of Catholic Church property after the Ratzinger letter. And it was right after you came out.
Okay.
Because I remember calling Marianne and saying, Marianne, I always wondered why I had this affinity for LGBT issues.
Oh.
I was like driven toward it, got really involved. Well, now I know why, because of Erin coming out and the difficulties that were inherent in that, and she said, good, you can join the board. Like, okay, all right, all right, you got me. And it was great, because we would fly to different cities and have our board meetings, and then meet with a local group. And it was all, and Mark Mattson, the president at that time, he was marvelous, just marvelous. And then Lourdes, of course, became president. I don't know if there was a women president before or not. I think maybe there was, but she carried on what Mark had started. And so I was on a really good board, and we got a lot done and had wonderful conferences, and I worked on marriage equality. We started simple. Why we would put ads with Marianne, because Marianne and Becky had adopted 2 children through their family services. And we'd basically say, this is what a gay couple looks like, and just try to humanize the situation. So we had some really good PR people on the board, and it really got the ball rolling. And Marianne became the HR, the people that own
HRC.
Now I'm trying to think of the family that owns Stryker Saws. They have a foundation, and they became really involved with giving us money, because they wanted to work on the politics shift, the cultural shift in engaging with the politics right around when Obama was president. And so she got to go to the White House and meet with certain people in the administration on how important that was, which was all rolling toward marriage equality. And dignity played an outsized role given its actual size. In fact, we were told by this priest at the Vatican that the Vatican was very concerned about dignity, and always would send people to our conferences to spy to see what was going on, because they felt that it was a really important group, and it was important because we were also organizing people overseas. And so there's this thing now called the Global Catholics. I can't remember the exact name, but we had a number of people come in a couple of conferences ago from overseas when we still had the money coming in from the foundation, from Uganda and Italy and, countries like that. And when you hear about what's going on in Africa, it's just horrendous, with the influence of the evangelical Christians pushing this. So basically, because the United States is seen as very progressive compared to, countries in the South America, Asia, things like that. I don't know if that's so true anymore with the way the politics are heading in this country, with the what I would call restoration. In other words, let's go back to the good old days. It always happens after you have a major movement, that there's like a backlash, and the question is, how far back can they drag you? But but that's the way movements are. You get far ahead, and then the people that are in power don't want to cede power, and so they push back, and then you have that tension, and that's what's going on today, I think.
Well, even in the Catholic Church, so I grew up in an evangelical church, and so I'm definitely aware of like all that. Even in the Catholic Church too, with Francis being so progressive, I think there's also this kind of split now too, and this kind of
it's been there.
It's been there.
It's been there. I used to get hate mail from like church militant type people, and what's his name, William Donahue, who I debated on TV and cleaned his clock. He was a big mouth in those days too, and he still is, with his group out of New York. Yeah, the far right wing, and unfortunately, because that's where the bishops are, that's who stayed. I mean, you go to a Catholic church these days on a Sunday, and attendance is way down. The pandemic certainly accelerated it. In conjunction with the child abuse scandal, plus attitude toward women. I mean, none of my daughters belong anymore. My two grandkids were baptized in a not Anglican,
Episcopal.
Episcopal church, with a women priest. And that's it. The rest of them haven't been, and I don't blame them for it. I mean, not with the reactionary way that they're treating employees, and in terms of, you get outed and then you lose your job. You may have been the music minister for a million years and you get outed, or a new pastor comes in and says, "Oh no, we can't have that." And it's like, no, I'm not going to be. Why would I be part of what I consider an ongoing criminal conspiracy in terms of ignoring the child abuse stuff that's going on right in front of them? It's unfortunate. I'm glad somebody like Francis comes along, because he will have, I believe, appointed a majority of the cardinals who will vote on the next pope, which hopefully means that he's going to still be somebody that's progressive. But the Catholic Church moves glacially. It'll be long after I'm dead. It will probably be. I predicted that. I mean, I predicted long ago that they would rather embrace gay priests than women priests, because they're male, and they're already there. I mean, a huge percentage of them already there, based on what psychologists that have done research have uncovered.
The reference that you made about the cleaning the guy's clock, was that the Crossfire episode that you were on?
No, it was that was actually on, was it CNN? I remember them calling me, the producer, whoever it was, because I was on CNN, I was on Fox, I was on MSNBC, it might have been MSNBC. And it was a debate about the child abuse situation. And I told them ahead of time, I said, I'm not going to go on with that guy because I saw him recently and he's just allowed to do whatever he does. And I said, and if the only way I'll come on your show is if you protect me, because if you don't, I'm walking off the set. And they did. They did. The people on the other side just shut him down. And I think it was on Hannity's show.
Oh wow!
But it was the other guy. He had the other guy on with him. This was before it got really bad, where he was still like sort of normal. He was conservative, but he was normal. I think that was the show. I don't know. There were so many of them. I was even on
Hannity and Colmes.
Colmes. Yeah. I think it may have been around that time because most of my TV appearances were about this child abuse issue or John Paul died. In fact, I was on this local PBS news show that was very big in Chicago. And I was on with this woman who was a real conservative person that belonged to one of these right-wing groups. And it was right after 9/11. And she was telling me about how, because they would always try to conflate homosexuality and the child abuse thing.
Right.
And I said, so are you saying that priests like the chaplain who died in 9/11, I forget what his name was right now, because he was a member of Dignity, the priest that got killed at the site when he was attending to the wounded. Judge, Michael Judge. I said, are you saying that he should have been a priest? And she had no idea he was gay. And she was like, oh, blah, 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 blah. My girlfriend, who I was in church with, which Christ News Parish, she sends me a message. She said, did you out Michael Judge? I said, no, it was well known that he's a gay priest. No, I did not out him, but when you hit people with stuff like that, they're like, oh, I don't mean him. I don't mean her, that kind of thing. So I was just a real troublemaker.
I love it. I love it.
Or yeah, Kelly, go ahead.
Well, I was gonna. You mentioned a little earlier that you've been seeing a spiritual director for 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to Aquinas Institute about 3 years ago, and I'm that's what I do now, and I work mostly with women, pretty much 99% women, and I'm just curious if you think that relationship and that practice, spiritual direction, because I do think that's a very female driven kind of,
it can be,
a lot of spiritual directors are women.
Sure.
If that's a way that kind of, I don't know, that women have kind of found some grounding in the church, because I didn't know what spiritual direction was, and growing up Protestant, it's a specific, now you can find spiritual directors in any religious practice, but I'm just curious, like, how that has fed you as a woman.
Well, I started to go when I was done being president of Call to Action, because that was a really heady time. I mean, especially with what was going on in the church. I did so many, because John Paul II had died, and no, that was after I was just a communications person then. I just felt like, oh my gosh, this big role I played, and now I'm not playing that big role again. Now what do I do? And Sheila Daly had suggested I see Sister Pat, because she's just down the road from me, right across from where Jenna and Sarah went to high school. And she meets you where you're at. And I was told that you need somebody who's a little bit farther than you on the journey. And because if they're way up here, you're not going to meet. Now, she's always been way up here, but she meets you where you're at. And, we explored, I think a lot of what we explored was just my image of God and how much it
Mhm.
had shifted. And now I didn't know kind of what to do. I mean, I'd read all these feminist theologians, but great. Now, what does it mean to me personally? And one of the things she told me to do is, what do you want to call God?
Mhm.
And I said, Sophie.
Mm.
And then my daughter got a cat. Now, nobody knew this. I just hadn't told anybody that about it. And then my daughter got a cat because she had moved to her own place after a breakup and stuff. And what does she name the cat? She names the cat Sophie. And I had been praying, please, please let some love come into my daughter's life. And it ended up being Sophie the cat for a while, you know.
Aw.
But it was, yeah, it's been wonderful. She's been there in
Yeah.
the worst of days and the best of days. She was at the party. Everybody's at the party I'm talking about. And she's helped me see like a third way about
Mm.
issues.
Mhm.
She has shown me exercises in terms of how to get down to your real core to see what you really believe and what um, whatever we call God really wants for you
Mhm.
in
Mhm.
terms of
Yeah.
directing you to be open to opportunity. I mean, the whole thing with call to action came because I said yes to my neighbor. I said
Mhm.
yes to Sheila. I said yes. I once gave a talk to a bunch of women about the power of saying yes. And you think it's a little thing and it turns out to be huge. You want to go to baby shower?
Yeah.
Sure. But
Yeah.
you keep, you're being awareness, you're being in tune with where the spirit is kind of driving you. I just don't
Yeah.
believe that things are all random. Let me tell you a story that really, this happened before call to action when I was going to Jesus Day. There was a woman there, a sister called Miriam Therese Winter, and she was doing a talk about women in Jesus. And she was saying stuff like, how dare they say that women can't be priests when the blood of a woman flowed through Jesus. I mean, she was just wonderful, just absolutely wonderful. And I was just so excited. And she'd written a book about all the women in the New Testament, which was like over 60. And I was like, 60, where'd they come from? But and that morning, I was taking a shower. I always do my best spiritual stuff in the shower. And this song came into my head, Joy is Like the Rain. I hated the song. I had to sing it in high school. I just didn't like it very much. And all of a sudden, after all these years, I'm thinking of Joy is Like the Rain. What the heck is going on? So I decided to buy her book about all the women in Christianity in the New Testament. And then she's written about the Old Testament too. She was a songwriter as well. So, but I didn't know that at the time. So I buy the book and I open the thing up and she wrote the song. And
Whoa.
you talk about the feeling like you were led to something.
Yeah.
It's like, whoa, this is, oh my gosh. And I wrote her. This is before I knew her. I actually got to know her at Call to Action because she would come and speak all the time. And I actually told the story from the podium. And I said, I wrote her this letter. And I said, I just want you to know that this happened and I love your book. And, it's being very, it's very, very helpful to me and everything. And she wrote me back and she said, there's so many layers of consciousness that we're unaware of, that she believed that it was one of those things that we know time's not linear. We know that things are created out of nothing in a quantum physics sense.
Mm-hmm.
So why not? Should that not be a
Mm-hmm.
thing? And it's just always the thing I pointed to as being something that says, yeah, I want you right here. And you're going to do all this stuff. And it's because I had the background in sex abuse as an attorney that I could help Call to Action get through it, because we were proposing all kinds of policies and stuff. And if a non-lawyer would not really know what they're doing in terms of what's feasible and not. But we came up with something that we presented in Dallas when I got thrown out of the hotel, that was better than what the church came up with, so yeah, it was a wild ride. I look back on those days and goes, God, that was fun. What am I doing now? Retired. I still teach and write, but it's not the same, but I have my house church group, which has been wonderful.
You could probably find a place to get thrown out of, I'm sure, right?
I don't want to get thrown. I mean, I don't want to get thrown out. The thing about in the United States is that unlike Europe, when the crowds turn out, it really doesn't change anything.
Yeah.
Signing petitions means absolutely nothing to the church. You've got to, well, from my standpoint, you got to hit them where the money is. That means you got to not give them money. And that's what's happening. That's why all these churches are consolidating. They don't have enough priests. And then people get pissed off when they lose their home church and they stop going. And I mean, it's just the schools. A lot of the schools are closed down. We're housing migrants. Going to house migrants in some of the closed schools in Chicago. So
yeah, we're closing a bunch here.
Yeah. Well, the church is just it doesn't have the status that it used to have because of what they did to the kids and still doing. And to the nuns, to the women, adult women too, people that would take advantage of counseling sessions. And we had a priest, he wasn't a pedophile, he was a pastor at the time that Father Fred happened, but he ended up leaving because he had affairs with 10 different women. And eventually it came out. So they had to rename the hall after him. That had been named after him. The grade school my kids went to was a real den of iniquity.
So scary. I mean, and when you think of even some of the most sainted men.
Mother Teresa's spiritual director. He was prosecuted in Wisconsin because the statute hadn't run since he lived in Illinois, and a judge would show up en masse in the courtroom on his behalf, sitting there trying to intimidate the witnesses. One of whom was deaf. One of the victims. Yeah, it was really sad. The whole thing was sad. There's so much more that I found out in going to these meetings with attorneys and stuff. Yeah, it was
so being in that, seeing so much of that and seeing the behind the scenes. I mean, it's so understandable that you would leave the church, but I guess my question is, but you didn't leave your faith. You still have your home church. You still have.
Well, it depends what you define as faith. I mean, the way that the Catholic Church talks about it is this depository of rules kind of thing. I would say I didn't lose my spirituality.
Yeah.
The reason I didn't lose my spirituality is because I met all these phenomenal people who were trying to change the church for the better.
Yeah.
And, people that were protesting the School of the Americas. Well, one of the women just died the other day. She was like 91. I'm going, no, she's 91. How is that possible? I met her when I was like 40, She's probably older then. But just lovely, wonderful, I guess you could call faith-filled people, but faith in the true basic sense of what Jesus taught was that, do unto others, the golden rule, do unto others as they would do unto you. And, you turn the other cheek. That doesn't stop you from
taking action in positive ways.
Hypocrisy and evil. Yeah. But, and ultimately, and we can see in the world, violence is never an issue. I mean, it's never the answer to an issue. Not in Gaza, not in Israel, not in Ukraine, not in Russia. I mean, it only ends up hurting lots and lots of people. So let's sit down and find a way to make peace. I mean, I guess those are the two principles that I go by, in terms of the essence. And it really doesn't matter what my image is of that power. But to me, it's part of every human being has that capacity, but it gets twisted for various and sundry reasons.
You mentioned Teilhard too earlier. Do you want to talk a little bit about Teilhard?
Well,
and
I read him in high school at Hannity Colmes. Like I said,
I really?
I had very radical nuns. Yeah.
Wow.
We wrote to, one of our assignments, I think sophomore year, was to write to world famous theologians. I wish I had kept what I did, because I think I may have written to Karl Rahner.
Wow.
I mean, the biggies in those days. Remember,
Yeah.
I was in high school right during Vatican II.
Yeah.
So you had all this literature coming out, the books about Vatican II and the writings and everything. And you had Pope John the 23rd, who was this just delightful man, who pulled it off, and so that's what we did. We studied the documents of Vatican II, that we are the church, which was the slogan of Call to Action. And it was a cool time to be Catholic, because the priests and the nuns were marching in Selma, and you were part of a movement that was trying to change and end racism, and not so much looking at women in those days, but they were at least out there on the right side during the civil rights movement, at least, up by us. And so, when I read Teilhard de Chardin, it was like, oh, this is really interesting. The whole, and he was silenced prior to Vatican II, I believe. And I think it got lifted maybe after that.
So Erin, he was a scientist, a paleontologist.
Yeah.
And
so what he did is he saw evolution as different ages, like, the Mesozoic age. And I forget what he called our age, which was the rise of human consciousness.
Yeah.
He was very much into eco-spirituality, and the cosmic, because basically didn't Chardin use noosphere as one of his concepts?
The noosphere.
Yeah. In terms of basically human consciousness we have never had a period where animals could reflect on humans had consciousness, which allowed us to reflect on creation. And this was a huge step up from regular evolution, where before it was all biological and so forth. And then now you've got human consciousness, and it's going to keep going. And so this is like a new age. And Chardin started off with that. Thomas Berry was his spiritual successor, basically. Brian Swim.
Do you know Elia Delio?
Yes, I met her. She spoke at our conference. Yeah. Is she Brazilian or?
No,
I thought she was Brazilian. We flew in all these people from all over the place, Europe and South America, and that. Yeah, she was wonderful. Yeah.
It's you were in the midst of all of it. Yeah.
Oh, it was. I tell you, one time we had the penthouse in the hotel we were staying at. As president, I used to get to stay in the penthouse. And I was sitting there with a high school friend who had come up from St. Louis, and then later met a man there who was a priest that became her second husband, because she had been widowed in her 40s. And I was sitting there, and Hans Kung is there, and Michael Crosby, who was a wonderful speaker and from Milwaukee. So all these biggies, are in this dining room. We're having a cocktail party. And I turned to Martha and I said, "Can you believe this? How did we get here? How did we, get in the midst of this guy's, he created the World Parliament of Religions, and, And it was just such a rush to think that here you little girl from St. Louis who, just like a little Catholic and went off to DePaul because sister told us to, ended up in this spot. I mean, it's just like, wow, how could it be anything other than sort of going with the flow of the spirit in your life? It was
a radical yes.
Yeah, the radical yes. Yeah, it was awesome. It was a lot of fun. This is bringing back so many good memories.
Good.
I really had a life then.
So cool. It's so interesting.
It is.
You didn't know, did you?
No,
The
I mean,
extent of it.
I know, yeah, like I knew bits and pieces, but it's like Kelly has so much more background on like
Oh, yeah.
all
Yeah.
of these scholars and things that you're people that you're referencing, and it's cool to know,
Yeah, it really
like,
is.
yeah, that you were in the mix of all that.
When
I was like, Erin, how did you never tell me about your aunt?
Well, and that's why when your parents told me about you, I was like, well, why didn't you call me like a year ago? I could have made things so much easier. I could have referred you to all these. We have this whole big website, Dignity USA, on what does the Bible really say about homosexuality and stuff. And so there's all these resources. In fact, most of our members, at least when I left the board, most of the new members were not coming through Dignity chapters because younger people have left. But what we were getting were conservative kids raised by conservative Catholics who were searching the internet saying, how can God love me because I'm gay?
Yeah.
And then Dignity would pop up right away and we say, come on in. But what was weird though, and which was kind of difficult for me, is you had to re-educate them on feminist theology because they didn't have a clue. They were all into devotions and work, all this stuff that I don't even know about anymore. And so you had to kind of like re-educate them and say, oh, no. We don't view women that way here. We have women presiders. And if you're welcome in, but we're beyond that. And it's like,
Yeah.
There were where I was 20 years before that. It's like, oh, I don't have the patience to deal with this anymore, but it's interesting and wonderful because I've heard of so many people at Dignity conferences that will get up and say, Dignity saved my life because I thought I was all alone. I thought I was terrible. I thought this, that, the other thing. And I didn't commit suicide because I had Dignity to go to. I had somebody to talk to. And it was interesting, the parallels between that and the kids that were molested, that were adults struggling. It was almost the same type of process, that because they often would feel like, what's wrong with me that this would happen to me? And then you've got it's committing spiritual homicide with both people, with both groups. So there's a lot of parallels in terms of trying to get past what society has taught and made them feel like and things like that. So yeah, I considered that really, really important work. I think that's why in my life it's been so conjoined together.
Yeah. Yeah, when I think about the harm of that purity culture alone just has done.
Oh, yeah.
And then on top of that, you put in, sexual assault or, sexual abuse.
Yeah.
The same people who are telling you about, teaching you this is the way you need to be. I mean, it's like, I mean, just, talk about, spiritual homicide. I mean, that is just devastating.
Because you're taught that God's this important person in this, in your life, and then the God's messenger is the one that's doing it to you, and it's like, so you don't even have that to go to anymore.
Yeah,
I mean, it's just terrible. you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's, I mean, things are so much better now in that even with the reactionary response, there are so many more resources for
Yeah.
young people. But if you're from a red state, rural area, you're going to turn to the internet when you can. And that's
Mhm.
how Dignity is finding
Yeah.
people. And then when we started to Zoom during the pandemic, help bring people together in a way that didn't happen before. So Marianne is just like, she's the sharpest, most strategic leader. We are so lucky to have her. She was president early on, and then became executive director, and then she left and worked for a hospital in strategic planning. I think it was in Massachusetts for a while, and had a series of directors that just didn't. Dignity was kind of in financial trouble, and they raised money to bring Marianne back. And she's just such a forward strategic organizational whiz. Oh my gosh, we're so lucky to have her. So lucky.
Well, we're lucky
Well,
to have you too,
yeah,
right?
that's what I was
yeah,
gonna
I
say.
mean, yeah, I mean, I think that's probably a good place is to say, to like thank you for all the work that you dedicated your life to make a difference for for people now. I mean, it has made a huge difference.
Yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
it's the thing about it though is that it's not, when you do this kind of work, it's not something that you choose so much as you're chosen in some weird way.
Mhm.
And I mean, I was raised I mean, Jessica was little then when I got started in this. I mean, she was only maybe 5 when I started with Call to Action, and I was traveling all over the place and everything, and the kids were growing up. How in the world, I tell Alan sometimes, how in the world did I do all this stuff?
Mhm.
And but it felt easy. When you're in the
Mm.
right place, it feels easy. And I've been struggling with, well, what kind of volunteer work should I get into now that the pandemic kind of wiped out what I'd been doing before? And my spiritual director is saying, it's not, you don't have to make it happen. You'll recognize it when you see it. So don't like try to overthink it. And she's very,
Yeah.
very, and that kind of lets you off the hook to a certain extent. And so that, when the time comes, whatever comes my way, hopefully I'll recognize it for what it is. Because I've learned before that it it may be a lot of work, but it doesn't feel like it if you're in the right place
Yeah.
spiritually and doing what you're
Yeah.
doing. And sometimes it's maybe what I'm supposed to be doing right now is doing all this training before for building code inspectors, because people do need to live in decent housing. Maybe that's what I'm supposed to be doing right now, because I sure am doing a lot of it compared to even 4 years ago. The pandemic just sort of like jump started it all over again.
Mm.
So I don't know. And I like teaching. So
Yeah, I think something, thinking about, work that feels easy. It's because it's generative, right? It's like
yes.
in the same way that you're working, you're also like being energized.
Yeah, it's life-giving.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not, I mean, you can burn out, but if you take care of yourself, hopefully you won't. Now, sometimes, it's time to go, like with being on boards and stuff, it's like, especially if you're on a board that isn't real functional. I hate that. I was on a women's board like that with lawyers, and it was the ones with kids and married with the singles. And so these ones would like, oh, let's go on a retreat this weekend. It's like, no, I got a 2-year-old at home. I'm breastfeeding, Yeah. They didn't
Well,
understand
hopefully,
until they got married and had kids.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I hope that this conversation, inspires other people, like your story inspires other people to seek out the thing that is generative, that
Yeah.
is putting good works out into the world and is bringing energy back to them in their lives also.
That's a
So
good way to
thank
put
you.
it.
Yeah, thank you for taking the time to share your story with us.
You're welcome.
Thanks,
And we'll
Linda.
have to have you back. You guys can talk more about
We can
books.
talk more feminist theology, maybe.
Yeah.
I have to do my research.
Special thanks to our guest, Linda Pieczynski, for joining us and sharing her fascinating story. If you're interested in learning more about Linda's work, including Call to Action, SNAP, and Dignity USA, please use the links in our show notes.
We appreciate our listeners for their continued support. If you found this episode interesting or any of our episodes interesting, we're going to ask that you please share it with a friend. And maybe not just one friend, but how about 5, maybe 10? Chances are they'll find it interesting too, and it'll really help us out. Atheist is produced by Justin Sywell and Trend Media STL. You can follow us and other great podcasts on Instagram at STL Podcasts.
Thank you for listening, and keep looking for connection.